Hi, I'm Mark McClain, CEO and founder at SailPoint, and welcome to our Identity Matters podcast, where I have the opportunity to talk with security experts, business leaders, and really smart people who are humble, hungry, and ready to tell us about their leadership journey. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by Sudhakar Ramakrishna. I've known Sudhakar for quite some time, and he is the CEO of SolarWinds, a very familiar name in the security industry, and a fellow Austin-based leader. So Sudhakar, so glad you could join us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Well, listen, you and I have known each other for a bit, but go ahead and let's give folks a little bit of backdrop on kind of your journey to this point. You've been leading SolarWinds for a number of years now. SolarWinds been on an interesting journey, like SailPoint, in and out of the public markets a little bit, and early on, kind of an early leader in some of the IT management, but more and more kind of part of the global cybersecurity story. So, if you're just going to kind of help folks get a current snapshot of where you are, how would you summarize where SolarWinds is today and kind of your mission in the industry today?
Absolutely. Mark, I've now been at SolarWinds almost 5 years. SolarWinds, as you mentioned, has had a very, call it, storied history over the years of serving customers. And our initial foray was in the broader space of monitoring software. So we became leaders in monitoring networks, systems, databases, and applications. Over the last 5 years, due to customer preferences, market changes, a whole notion of hybrid, and of course the security landscape, we've evolved from being a company focused on monitoring to now delivering what I call operational resilience to customers. And there are many connotations of it, but if you think about what does operational resilience mean to us and to our customers, it is, think of it as on a common platform, delivering the ability to automate, observe, visualize, and remediate customer environments. And these customer environments could be spread across multiple clouds, hybrid environments, can have networks, systems, databases, applications, etc., which is leverage the rich history of SolarWinds, but then translate it into today's world where, as you know, things like alert fatigue, things like productivity challenges, AI, security are all hitting customers from different angles. So in that world, how do you keep them productive? How do you keep them running? And how do you keep them operationally resilient is what we do.
Well, and obviously, Sudhakar, that ties near and dear into our hearts. Obviously, in the world today, when you're doing IT operations, almost inevitably that has to at least incorporate, if not highly integrate, with the security landscape, because every IT operation in the world now is under some level of attack, typically by the outside and occasionally, as we all know, from the inside. When you think about how much shifting and evolution there's been in the landscape around security, and you've had a familiarity with SailPoint, when you think about the realm of security and within that even the realms of identity and trust, and what are some of the key things you see happening in around the market today that you think are really interesting?
I mean, from a market standpoint, I won't be telling you anything, Mark, that you don't already know. Concepts like zero trust, concepts like least privilege access, et cetera, are around, have been around, and will continue as we move forward. But the way I think about security at large for all of us as security practitioners is how do we reduce the threat surface as quickly as we possibly can, and how do we reduce the threat window as quickly as we can. So I know it's easier said than done, but the more we try to do things, and that results in challenges around identity, that results in challenges around infrastructure security, application security, et cetera, that is the way we can continue to improve. And the reason why I say continue to improve is the nature of security and the nature of security threats is such that no single company has all of the answers all the time. Many of us have really good answers most of the time, but not all of us have answers all of the time. And so we talk about depth in defense, and so it's not a single thing. There are many aspects to security that need to be addressed. One of my favorites, I would say, is that ultimately, as providers of software to enterprises, our goal is to help them become more productive, more efficient, etc. And yet, if you think about the notion of a firewall or the image of a firewall, is that of a brick wall, right? And it has sustained for a long time. And so my thought around security always is security should be about access, not about control.
Mm.
So, in other words, we can clamp every possible control we want and make it difficult for people to break through. But they may also result in lost productivity when you do that. If you make things easier or tougher for your employees, they're going to be less productive, for instance. So, how do we address the challenge of making security embedded, pervasive, and accessible, and not about control? I think therein lies a significant opportunity for innovation.
Well said. Yeah, and I think we all know, like you said, there's such resistance, especially in times of high innovation, like we're living through right now around AI and agentic and LLMs and all that, that the business wants to move quickly to take advantage of new opportunities for efficiency, effectiveness, competitiveness, all those wonderful things we learned in business school. And at the same time, everybody's highly attuned to the risks that can come with new technology. And like you said, there's a sense of the right people getting access to the right things to do what they need to do for the business, while ensuring that either the wrong people don't get access or the right people don't get access to things they're not supposed to, which could
Yeah,
also lead to challenges. And it's like you said, it's ideally invisible control is another concept, right? It's really
right.
access appropriately, which is sort of invisible control. I want you to be able to act like you can go anywhere you want,
Yeah.
when in fact you can't go anywhere you're not supposed to go,
Exactly right.
right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
That's sort of an ideal world, right? Yes. And let me, you're a great leader, Sudhakar. One quick thing on the background of you and I as leaders, I thought it'd be a fun thing. We're in the realm of identity, and of course, identity security is about the identities in the enterprise that we're protecting. But I also think, as companies, our companies sort of have an identity or a persona or at least a reputation, right? And you built a great company. Matter of fact, for those that don't know, Sudhakar inherited SolarWinds right after the difficulties came about from what happened to their business from an outside attacker. You talked about building, in your case, sort of rebuilding, not from a company you had before, but rebuilding the trustworthiness and integrity of a company that I think you've done a marvelous job with that,
Mhm.
both inside the company and out. How do you think about what it means to be, as a company's identity, to be a trustworthy, good partner in the market?
That's a great question, Mark. And you have done that, I would say, in SailPoint as well to return
Mm,
the kudos and the compliments, and you've continued doing that. When I think about it, the way I reflect on it is first and foremost, do we have a purpose
mm,
that matches to what
mm,
customers might look for in a company?
mm,
And that's the starting point, as far as I'm
mhm,
concerned.
mhm,
And oftentimes it just becomes a set of words, but many times it is lived by you, by the company, by everyone representing the company.
mhm,
So, to your point about identity, if we can truly translate our purpose into our actions, that would result in setting a identity that is worthy of living and being recognized. That's a starting point. Beyond that, I think it's a matter of, can customers rely on you in good and bad times? That's an important element of it, because we live in an interconnected world in more connotations than both of us can possibly describe on this call. And so, in that world, how do we support one another is a very important element of what reflects in our identity. Next is, do you really care? I mean, many times I've had customer conversations where I would tell them, for instance, hey, the technology choice that you're making, and it may have nothing to do with my company's technology choice, the technology choice you're making is not appropriate for your environment. And that's a matter of when the customer has trusted you to say such things because you truly care. And how do you get your entire company to be able to have those types of conversations with them? And then last but not least, do you as a company have the ability to learn and change? And are you humble enough to accept that you don't have all the answers, but you'll figure them out? So those are things that I think um, help customers believe us, build a dependable culture, and of course, a company that can be identified as great.
Yeah, boy, those are all wonderful tenets, and I think we certainly try to hold to some of those very same tenets
Absolutely.
at SailPoint. Matter of fact, one of my favorite things is our chief customer officer Meredith likes to say to customers, "I'm not really here to make you happy. I'm here to make you successful."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes I might have to make you a little bit unhappy when I tell you I need to do this to get where you need to go. I always joke that if you don't understand that, it's because you have never raised a teenager. If you raised a teenager, you understand at times I'm going to make you a little short term unhappy to help you be a successful adult. And so there's some commonality there, I think, in what we do in companies. Like sometimes we have to do the hard things to do the right thing for the long run, particularly sometimes
Absolutely.
even the short run as well. Well, that's a great backdrop. Well, obviously, the identity space is very interconnected with both, like you say, business advantage these days and security. And we've been using this word digital transformation for a number of years now. I don't know that we all saw how much digital transformation might actually be looming once AI and agentic swept onto the scene in an amazing way in the last, whatever you want to call it, 12 to 24 months. When you think about the customers, we share a lot of large and very large, in some cases, enterprise customers. And you talk to what risks are keeping those folks up at night in either their IT world, their security world, and sort of the intersection. What do you hear as the kind of the risks and the concerns that people are really worried about today?
Uh, there is a number of risks, Mark, as you well know, but I'll highlight a few that seem to be surfacing more and more to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One is, I believe, customers are getting a greater and heightened sense of interconnectedness that they have with direct and indirect vendors. So, for instance, the amount of open source code that might be running in your environment or in your enterprise, you may not have a good idea of it at all because you only know the vendors that you're working with. You don't quite know, call it the software bill of materials that people use to create things that you rely on. And so, what might be the vulnerabilities in that? What are the security aspects of it? How were they constructed? What kind of business risks might that create for me, et cetera, et cetera? Because every business, in some ways, is a software business today, no matter what industry you may be in. So that's percolating more and more to the top. The second one, which you are in the middle of, is the whole notion of identity. Again, going back to the interconnectedness of it, we rely on third parties, we rely on partners, we rely on providing them access to our assets and infrastructure. What policies do they have? What training do they have? What internal controls do they have? Those things directly affect your core business as well. So identity becomes an issue. Increasingly, third party nation state attacks, and we've seen some examples of those even recently as well, just in the last week. So, how do we learn from one another? Um, so, I'm a strong believer that when someone is afflicted with a security issue, that should not be viewed as a competitive advantage for somebody who is not yet afflicted with that. And instead, we as a software community need to jump in, create this notion of community vigil, and support them. And so that is the third item that I would highlight. I can keep going on, but I'll keep to those three for now.
Those are fantastic. And I agree with you 100%. I think we're all, especially as the world has shifted over 20, 25, 30 years now from attacks coming from kind of what we used to call hackers,
Yeah.
right? People that were just trying to break in to prove they could. They may not have even had an
And
evil
intention.
intent to hurt your company or steal your money. They were like, sometimes, frankly, smart kids wanting to prove they could
Yeah.
outsmart others with their technical prowess. That clearly moved to the criminal element a number of years ago, and now we've seen everything, obviously, in the world of phishing and ransomware and all of these things. And as you said, Sudhakar, we're recording this, by the way, in late October. Big news in the last few weeks about another
Yeah.
apparent nation state attack that hit a very
Yep.
big security vendor. The realm now of we as individual software players, and again, this is exactly what you stepped into to try to help with at Solar was, when a smallish, mid-size even business is trying to fight against a country, that's an unfair fight. And so there's a sense of we have to band together, share knowledge, share help between the commercial community, all of us in the vendor community, and our customers who are often quite smart and understanding what's happening, and our government, right? Like you say, it's a sense of we all have to share our knowledge and advance our state of understanding more rapidly than the bad actors, right? And boy, that's a particular challenge in the rapidly unfolding world of AI, where we think everybody's got a new set of tools at their disposal, and we want to leverage those tools as rapidly as the next guy to make sure we're taking advantage of those ways in which that technology can help us fight against the bad actors while advantaging our business. Yeah, in some ways, these world. I was going to ask a question about complexity, and honestly, I think it's sort of dovetails in with this whole concept and again this rapid evolution of AI and large language models that we're seeing all around us. When you think about kind of everything that you see happening in this increasing complexity, like you said, almost indecipherable tech stacks now, what all is inside that bill of materials? We don't always know that, as you said. And of course, all of our legal friends are worried that AI may be creating new parts of our code that we don't know
Yeah.
exactly the source of that and how it got into our code. And there's all kinds of worries there as we try to be productive. And then you think about AI itself, Sudhakar, when you think about kind of I'll simply call it the pros and cons of what that's doing to our industry, the upside, the potential that we see with AI, how you're thinking about it at Solar, and then also the negatives and the concerns and the risks. What are some of the conversations you feel like you're having that are really interesting about that in the world today?
I mean, like with anything, Mark, it is the responsibility. So I like to think of it as a responsible AI. I mean, just like if you take a rudimentary example of coding, many of us who have coded for many years, one of the first things they teach us is how to do defensive coding. So it's again, responsible coding is the way I would describe it at that point. Now you take that and multiply that by 1,000 factor complexity and sophistication, you get into the world of responsible AI. I'm a net believer in it in terms of its ability to improve velocity, drive productivity, lower costs, and in general, like many key technology trends, be productive for humankind and humanity, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Equally, like with any good thing, there are dangers that are on the flip side. So if you use any tool like without proper training, without proper context, you tend to misuse it. And I think the propensity and the opportunity, let's call it, to misuse is great. So the notion of ethical AI and governance of I think is a very important thing. To me, governance doesn't mean that, again, similar to what I said about security should be about access, not about control. Governance should be about principles and rules and a way of working versus a way to impede progress, right? And as you just mentioned, we have those call it debates even internally about how much should we let loose, what should we do, et cetera, et cetera. And having that healthy, not so much friction, but tension of pull and push is important because together it'll build more empathy and better governance. But as it relates to us at SolarWinds, almost every function leverages AI in some way or another. And our products, we've been investing in AI related solutions since about 2021. In fact, just on October 6th, on this day, which we call SolarWinds Day, which is a Wednesday, we
Okay.
announced our upcoming AI products as well.
Yep. Now, I think, like you said, we've all seen a lot of technology over the years that is ethically or morally neutral. One could argue it can be used for good intent and bad intent. That's true of the internet. It's true of mobile computing. It's true of so many things, right? There are wonderfully great things for culture, society, business that have come out of these technologies. And as we all know, some dark side and
Yeah,
some things
absolutely.
that we wish weren't out in the universe, but they are. And that's part of what gives those of us in security, part of that purpose you talked about earlier, is to say, I'm going to help try to protect and defend enterprises who are trying to do good things so they're not distracted or hurt by those that are trying to do those other things. When you think about, I know you've used that phrase in your business, secure by design, kind of talking about how do you not only have ethical AI but secure AI, and these again gets beyond AI to just generally how do we build and leverage technology, right? Ethical and secure and safe for our users. We want to advance what we're doing for them, right? We want to create more capability and functionality that our customers can use, while we don't certainly introduce more risk, but in fact, ideally reduce their risk and make them safer and better. When you think about how you guide your teams around some of those concepts, Sudhakar, and used a word I love to talk about, which is, instead of problems, which can sometimes be solved, there are just tensions that we have to manage. This is a classic in that realm, right? Like, it's not like you're going to be either secure or productive,
Yes, yes,
right? You
yes,
are going to have to be both.
yeah.
How do you think about, as you're such an experienced leader in technology, how do you think about guiding your teams as they're wrestling with some of those tensions today?
Yeah, specific to AI, Mark, or in general?
Probably we could say in general, but I think you and I both, our brains would go to the challenges we're seeing in front of us with AI today, right?
Yeah, in fact, we had I would say, a spirited conversation on that even today.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I'll say,
Spirited is such a great word. I know what that might actually mean.
one thing I would say, and I'll come back to this topic in just 1 second, is another rampant thing that's happening is a proliferation of AI tools that are purportedly specialists in particular functions. So
Yes.
marketing will have 100 of those, sales will have 200 of those, etc. And so if you don't have the proper governance, we will
Hmm.
then become very, how do I say it, very myopic with our interests, and we actually be inadvertently doing things that are at
Hmm.
cross purposes to the overall goals of the enterprise. So what we have done is, again, in the spirit of governance, under the leadership of our CTO, Sai, we
Hmm.
have organized a cross-functional team that brings to bear any issues that might be either questions, issues, opportunities, ideas forward. And we try to do what's consistent with our organization's principles, of course, with the notion of speed, alacrity, and at the same time, security and other things.
Yep.
But we've also allowed for, I would say, experimentation and ideation at an individual level and or at a team level. So the way the AI initiatives in the company started, where the product team started doing certain things, let's call it writing code with co-pilots and such. The support and customer success teams started doing things like even basically organizing knowledge bases and so on and so forth. The marketing teams did things with honing demand gen activities, etc., and also writing collateral, at least the first cut of collateral. And in our case, our legal team is also a big believer in AI and has been using it internally as well. So while the legal team usually is considered the policing function, in our case, it's both helping us police ourselves or govern ourselves as well as a user of it, right? But instead of then saying, okay, the experimentation phase is done, now we need to start organizing things and be more streamlined. So the approach we have taken is, for the benefit of every Solarian,
Mm.
there is a centralized tool that we use, which is much more internally focused. So internal
Mm.
information,
Hmm.
which is firewalled, so it doesn't go its way into some public LLM. And that's kind of our way of improving productivity with responsible AI across the enterprise. So that's step one. So think of it as that initiative is funded by the corporation. Above and beyond that, we recognize that there are specializations required, be it in marketing, sales, support, etc. There, the individual organizations or teams, I would say, have the ability and the freedom, and of course, the spend to do what they need to do, but they will do it under the auspices of this broader AI board that we have within the organization. I would say, touchwood, thus far, that seems to be working, where I get the right balance of healthy debate, at the same time, discipline and rigor in adopting the tools.
Yeah, no, it really is this sense of, back to risk, right? We're ultimately in the business of managing risk in some ways with what we do in the industry. And there's a risk to being reckless about how fast you move in this realm. And there's clearly a risk to being too slow or too conservative. And I think that's the risk we're all trying to validate or manage, which is, I don't I don't want to rush headlong into this and like you say, either ethical or just unwise, get myself
Yeah,
in trouble with some of these amazingly powerful tools. You know, the old phrase "kids with guns" comes to mind here. Like this is some powerful stuff. You got to be careful who you let use
yeah.
it and what you let
Yes.
them do with it. But you realize there's risk to not letting it kind of get widely disseminated in your organization, encourage people to bring their creativity and their innovation, say, how can this
Absolutely.
make your work better, our company better, the thing you're doing for the business better? It is incredible tension to manage today of the
Absolutely.
speed that I told someone the other day, Sudhakar, like I've never in my career felt quite the same sense of the foot is on the brake and the gas at the same time.
At the same time.
People are trying to go fast and they're pressing on the brake at the same time because they see the risk and concern. Another friend said to me just literally today in a conversation, I'm not sure anybody's got this right, but my sense is we're underestimating how fast this is going to happen and what's going to change in the short run. And we're overestimating what's going to happen in the short run. And we're underestimating how
What can
dramatic
happen?
this will be, say, 10 years from now. Like
Mhm.
there was a sense it was all going to change the world in 24 months. Those have been around a while went, yeah, probably not that fast.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
my favorite on this has been, I mean, a lot of people compare the AI thing to different things, industrial revolution, this, that, the
yes.
other thing. But the thing that I've heard that struck with me was the AI revolution is as significant as humans identifying fire for the first time.
Mm.
So if you think about what all happened in the world
Yeah, a lot of
when
things
they
came out
first
of
made
that.
fire, exactly.
Yeah,
So
fire and or the wheel, I've been told, may have been the two most
yeah,
significant things that ever
yeah,
happened to humanity.
yeah,
But all right, well, this is yeah, and like I say, we'll continue to monitor and all that. Let me shift gears a little, Sudhakar, because part of the fun on these podcasts is talk about what's happening in the industry and technology and all that. But I also love bringing on folks like you who are seasoned, significant leaders, been around the game a bit and seen some things. You've worked across a wide array of early stage businesses, very large scale businesses, Citrix, Motorola, Solar now for a number of years. You've obviously developed some leadership core beliefs, philosophies, whatever you want to call that. When you think about some of the core things that help you as a leader kind of guide your day-to-day leadership of the business, what are the things that make it click for you?
just from a day-to-day standpoint, Mark, and I think I can relate to you because I've seen you in action as well. Um, I'll describe it as let's run very serious businesses because our work matters, but let's not take ourselves too seriously. And that's stuck with me for a very long time, and I try to live by that. And it gives you a sense of grounding. It gives you a sense of balance. It keeps you humble, and it also keeps you curious all the time. At least those are the things that I have found within myself. And so that is something that I hold very near and dear as a principle. It also makes you a lot more accessible, which then means that you can learn things much faster, no matter where a issue or a topic might arise in the organization. And then hopefully it gives you better organizational agility. So that is a very key element of what I believe in as a core principle of mine.
Yeah, I love how those are highly interrelated concepts of being humble enough to learn and stay curious while not taking lightly the importance of the work you're doing and the importance of holding teams
Absolutely.
accountable and saying we have to make progress and get things done. And I like to say, but there's no reason we can't have fun while we're doing it.
No.
All right.
And so I think sometimes we take ourselves a little too seriously and we think about it as it being about us. It is not. And the
Yes.
sooner we realize that, the better.
Yes.
And so I try to keep practicing that.
Yes, exactly. We serve an important purpose in the world at the time we're doing what we're doing. And if you want to stretch the calendar far enough out, 100 years from now, I'm not sure who will care, but 1,000 years from now, really not clear who will care. So be careful with your own sense of self-importance, right? That's great. Well, look, you've been through some. That's kind of, let's call them day-to-day leadership in good times. You've also experienced some challenges. Obviously, you inherited one. I'm always quick to say. So Docker did not create or allow the incident under his watch. He inherited it and then came in to kind of work work to get SolarWinds on a great trajectory again. When you think about leading through a crisis in general, I would say not just a cyber crisis, just a crisis, and you think about the pressure and the
Mhm.
visibility, what were the core learnings for you coming out of that kind of a really challenging circumstance?
Um, Definitely. I mean, I'm really, first of all, very proud of my team for call it sticking it out with me and going through that journey. Because while I can say I did a bunch of things, none of those would have mattered if the team didn't believe in them and actually did the work, right? I mean, I did my bit, but the team did the most of it. So I think all kudos go to them. The very first thing, as you said, in a crisis, what you do is, as difficult as it may be, to have a sense of calm and translate that into the organization, meaning that we'll take one step at a time and things will be better. And so there were a few core things that I've always believed in that I had to put into practice in this situation. So the first one is transparency, which is be transparent with your customers, with your employees, with your shareholders on what you know, what you don't, what happened, and what are you doing about it, etc. So that is the important thing because, as you know, there's a lot of spin control, as they call it, that goes on in these situations. And I just think it contorts you into doing things that are wasteful to the resolution of the problem. Instead, try to be constructive and transparent. Step one. Now that you're transparent in terms of saying to people what is happened, etc., demonstrate urgency, meaning do something.
Mm.
Um, do not do anything, but do something that is related to what is going on. So one is transparency, second is urgency. Third one is the need to communicate. You have to communicate relentlessly. The way you communicate with customers is different than shareholders, different than employees. So practice that. The fourth one, I spoke about this in the context of community vigil, would be collaboration. Seek help, give help, collaborate. And then the last thing I would say is to remain humble, that even if you overcome it, don't think it cannot happen to you again, or it will only happen to somebody who has not been efficient or any of that stuff, and keep learning from it. So those are the five things that I would say helped me through it and became much more reinforcing as well as we went through it successfully.
Yeah, no, these things are. What's like your company like mine. I'm sure we all do these desktop exercises
Yeah.
today around crisis and or cyber incidents or others. And I've often thought I'm getting to better at trying to treat those like they're real and think how would I really be reacting in the moment. But as we all know, nothing about a dress rehearsal is the same
And
as the real thing, or war
I,
games are not war, right? I said another way.
and I
Um,
didn't have time for a tabletop exercise.
yeah, you got thrown into the real thing. There was no tabletop exercise to learn on, right? So yeah, it's still a powerfully important story. And again, how you led through that, I think, was exemplary and really a great example for a lot of us to watch and see. If I ever get put in a very difficult situation like that, I want to keep my head that well and stay grounded and all of that. Yeah, when you think about, again, you started SailPoint for a while. I don't know if we said that at the outside as a board member. I know you've done other things with leadership, as we said, and you certainly got a leadership mandate across a large global organization. When you think about how the world of boards thinking about, they've always been oriented toward risk, but how boards are thinking about the challenges around cyber today, and even as our teams, our company was built to do kind of a security problem, and yet internally sometimes we have to remind people to be super conscious of risk and security things. What have you learned about just trying to keep those thoughts top of mind, whether you're talking to boards or C-level executives or just your team all the way through the org? How do you keep that mindset in the right place?
With the board, Mark, one of the very first things we did as I came on board was actually created a subcommittee of the board called the Tech and Cybersecurity Committee of the board. We actually did that. And the reason why we did that is, having been on other public companies, the audit committee's view of risk oftentimes is centered around financial risk, accounting practices, financial risk, et cetera. And to expect them to also think about cyber risk, which is almost a equal level thing to financial risk these days, was a bit much. So we formed a subcommittee of the board. We called it the Tech and Cybersecurity Committee. We had the discipline of committee meetings, etc. And there was a really good give and take. It allowed us for two things. One is as a management team, including my CISO, we would talk to them about what we're doing on both the technology side as well as the cyber side. And two, get their independent view and have the entire board be, call it educated slash updated on either best practices or our progress. So that is, I would say, a good practice that I hope more and more companies can adopt. Internally, Secure by Design essentially became the framework by which we all drive our business. It's not just a product thing, it's an across the board thing. And there are many offshoots of it. There's infrastructure security, there's application security, there's build system security, etc., etc. And we not only invested in it, but we also lived it, I would say. And to be honest with you, that is a continuous process, ongoing process where there can be improvement made every single day, I would say. So that is the second piece of it. The third piece of it with customers was demonstrating to them in visible terms, be it on the product side, as well as our industry leadership on how we are translating Secure by Design to solutions. So that became kind of our rallying cry.
No, it's good. Yeah, I think there's a sense of everybody's trying to elevate their game, so to speak, in all of these areas. And I think people are looking for counsel, tips, and tricks, as it were, on how do you help your team continue to think about these things. It's interesting, I don't know if it'll happen. I've heard rumblings that so many companies like ours and yours have created cyber/tech committees. It's still not a mandate from the SEC if you're a public business. I think it's probably looming as a mandate. Like, is this any less important in today's world than having an audit committee that ensures your financial data is accurate and protected? It's hard to believe that in today's world that's any less critical, that you're protecting the technology. Somebody said recently, every business is now either a tech business or a tech-enabled business. There's almost no such thing that's not, right? So it's so integral to how we do business. How could it almost not be an area of that level of
And
focus?
it becomes even more of a priority, in my opinion, to companies that are not necessarily rooted in technology to begin with. So not the tech companies necessarily, which you can assume that they have these practices, but let's say you are in healthcare, you are in manufacturing. Those industries require this a lot more because there's a lot of critical infrastructure that's dependent on them, and having this consciousness at the board level becomes extremely important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of boards are, matter of fact, they're all running around looking for cyber experts to help them because they don't exactly know how to even have some of these conversations. It's just not in their realm of expertise and experience, right? So it's a real issue. Well, we're going to continue to help try to educate and lift the industry, with what we do and how we help people understand the business impact of all these things, et cetera. It's still a thing. Well, kind of in this crossover of kind of your leadership and kind of the industry dynamics here, there's a sense, like you said, I think kind of we've joked about, there's stats out there say, 90% of companies have been breached. I'm like, and the other 10% just don't know it, right? The likelihood you've had some level of breakdown in your defenses. And like you said, there's reducing the blast radius, as we call it. There's reducing time over target to minimize all that. But at the end of the day, it's reasonably likely these days that as a leader, you may face some kind of crisis, and it might be the cyber crisis. You sort of talked about some of the things you focused on and learned. If you were giving advice to someone who's thinking, I might have to face that in the next 5 years, what would you tell them now before they face that crisis that might be useful to them as they look forward?
You mentioned a couple of those, Mark. As much as you may be afflicted by something that you never anticipated, try to prepare as much as you can for the things that can happen. So having a tabletop exercise would be from time to time on different topics run by different members of your management team might be a good practice, because that just builds the connective tissue across your team. So it's a matter of also business continuity when you do that to help improve yourself. Two is try to adopt frameworks. It does not have to be a framework like Secure by Design, but a framework that you can implement, so to speak, in peace times. so to speak, and then build the muscle memory to respond. I'm sure many organizations have red team, blue teams, teams within their security organization that are doing phishing attacks
Mhm.
amongst themselves, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So invest, I would say, in threat intelligence. Invest in understanding what's happening in the landscape, not to cause fear or be paralyzed into inaction, but to be prepared for action if something were to happen. And then the fourth one is asking for help is not shameful at all. Just ask for help. When something happens, ask for help. And my view is that a lot of companies are hesitant to ask for help because somehow it is projected weakness when they do it. And I would submit that it only makes you weaker and it takes you away from actually servicing your customers because you're wasting time.
No, that's great. Yeah, and like you've from different angles touched on, community and learning and the humility it takes to be in that posture of admitting you can't solve it all yourself and you aren't aware of everything. And like you said, even a company like yours that went through a tough situation, we've had smaller things that have hit us, but nothing catastrophic. Knock on some wood here or whatever. But there's a sense of readying yourself, both with like tactical knowledge. And one of the things in our last tabletop that was really interesting was a lot of assumptions were being made about, well, we'd call this person, call that person, and then we said, okay, now that person's on a plane for 12 hours, now
Hmm.
what do you
Yeah,
do?
now what
Right,
to do?
just simple little adjustments like that. We all go back and forth to parts of the world, India and
Yeah,
others, where that person might be completely
yeah,
unavailable. If it's all hinges on that person, what's your simple tree decision tree for now I can't get to the head of that function or that top person who's got the authority to make that call. I mean, just
yeah,
simple things like that. You just think, oh wow, that's a very real scenario, and I hadn't thought about what I would do if all the key people were not immediately available to make this decision. Right, just simple things. Okay, well, this is super fun. Let me do it like we like to do in a bit of a rapid round with a few questions that are kind of fun for just getting inside a leader's head. I love this question for people like you and I that are a little more seasoned, is the nice word. If you could speak to your younger self, we don't have to go all the way back to 21 if you don't want to, but your younger self, and think, okay, you're going to be leading things 2 and 3 and 4, in my case, 4 decades from now. What's the best piece of advice you wish somebody had told you back then that you didn't actually hear back
don't rush through college.
then? Wow. Okay. See, in my case, college was the best 7 years of my life. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. But yeah, there's a real urgency to get out into the world today in the youth,
Yeah,
particularly we're off a little, but not really. High school situation today is if you're like a normal, reasonably advanced high school kid, you're often like a year through college when you leave high school. The way they do all the dual
yeah,
credit and the AP tests and
yeah.
so you just cut college from 4 years to 3 years. You might want that fourth year. You're going to
Yes.
season yourself and get a lot
Learn a bit.
smarter. And
Yeah,
yeah, no,
learn
I'd say rush to college. And look, I'll show my own bias on this one, Sudhakar. I get that we can do an awful lot of learning online and remote today. Wow, some of what I needed to learn at that point in life was because I was out of the house living with other people.
yes, absolutely.
There's nothing that quite, if you have that option, either in college or not long after, getting out and mixing it up in the real world is still important.
Absolutely.
Would be the
Absolutely.
other piece of that advice about how fast you rush through college. That's great. That's a fun one. I haven't heard that one. That's a great one. And you're a student, you're a learner, you're humble, like you said. Any things you've either recently read that you think are impactful, or even I like to say sometimes something you read a long time ago that's so impactful you either return to it or reference it regularly. Do you think about the kind of things that have impacted you?
I try to do um, things in parallel, Mark. One is I almost always am rereading a book that I've read before,
Oh,
and then
okay.
I'm reading a book that is for the first time. So that's my cadence. So I'm actually reading a book called Outsiders that you may have heard of.
Hmm.
It's a book about 8 CEOs that adopted, I would say, unconventional tactics, and
Oh. Hmm.
but they
Hmm.
created larger than life returns, let's say, for their companies. And then
Okay.
what tools did they use? What techniques did they use? I read this book long time ago. Maybe I was at an MBA at that time, but
Wow.
I've gone back to reading it. So that's one. The other book that I'm beginning to read is a book called Moral Ambition.
Hmm.
Um, you may have heard of a book called Humankind by
Hmm.
Rutger Bregman. That's
Hmm.
one of my favorite books. And he wrote this book more recently
Okay.
about
Hmm.
moral ambition, which is how do you apply your talents
Hmm.
to the greater good of humanity,
Hmm.
whether it be money or any aspect of it, capability, tools, etc. So I'm
Hmm.
reading that book as well. So
Interesting.
two very different kinds of books.
That felt so funny. I have two books that are in those same camps, different ones. So I'll take note of yours and get to them. My book that's like your first book. There's an older book from the '90s actually called The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. It's one of my favorites. I've reread it at least twice
Awesome.
from my first reading, and again written by a guy who sort of had a counterintuitive view of some of the leadership things you do in the world.
Yeah,
And again, it was in the '90s. Some of it before really we had the same kind of technology landscape we have today, and it was just interesting how some of those things might apply even more in an incredibly interconnected technology world. And then the latter one, there was famous book called Halftime, in kind of in the faith circles of a guy who sort of woke up partly through life and realized I've made a lot of money, done well, but I'm not sure I'm impacting humanity as well as I could. And
wow.
his famous tagline that came out of that book was, "Do you want to move from success to significance?" Was sort of the phraseology, right? Like, and I always tell people, well, look, that was a description of his journey. That wasn't meant to be prescriptive. It's not like spend the first half of your life not caring about people, making a lot of money, then go try to care about people. Like, no, that's not it
No,
either,
that's not it.
right? Like, how about you try to build success while you're thinking about the
Yes,
significance of what
yes,
you're doing and the impact? And to your point, sometimes as we get into the latter stages of our career, we have more cycles, more availability to impact things. I like to say what I feel proud of what we do. We're in the security realm, helping people be productive and secure, much like your company. At the same time, I'm like, I look with admiration on the people who are doing 100% good for the world
absolutely,
thing.
absolutely,
The Red Crosses of the world, like you
ab-
guys, it's pretty much pure goodness. There,
absolutely.
like way to go. Thanks for doing what you're doing. So yeah, I think those are helpful things to keep your brain thinking about the long term. Again, in the humility that, and yet still 1,000 years from now, it
Yes,
might not matter as much as
it
you
won't
think.
matter.
You won't matter as much as you think. I like to say, if my great grandkids know who I am, that's probably good. That's good. Okay, that's great. Okay, last thing, we call this thing identity matters. So as you think about just a little bit of a bringing it back to our thing, kind of what's going on in the realms of identity. We talked about corporate identity. There's our identity as people. We talk about kind of how we make an impact in the world, and of course, the digital identities we deal with all the time. Is there anything that you would say, a word or a concept or a phrase that kind of captures the moment in identity today? We feel like there's an awful lot of things happening in this realm. It's a very broad thought, but anything that just comes to mind, like, wow, this seems to really matter in the realm of identity today.
I'd say uniqueness,
Mm, mm,
uniqueness, both at a personal level as well as at a enterprise or a security level,
yeah, yeah.
establishing it
Yep, we're
living it.
there are very few true copies. Of course, what we've all learned is even identical twins are not
True.
truly identical, are they?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, one
That's
of
the
those
uniqueness.
favorite things I read in one of those things like you and I read outside of our normal day to day was a study that had been done on identical twins that had been separated, right, through
Yeah,
adoption or other
yeah,
things, and just the fascination of what's the old phrase, nature and nurture, right? How much of it was their nature, their literally almost unique DNA, and what their environment did to shape them. And in some cases, it's fascinating some of the similarities, and in other cases, fascinating how different things were when these people were put in very different environments that
absolutely,
literally were the quote same type of human because their DNA was almost identical, right?
absolutely.
Super fascinating to think about, like what is unique. I'm in your camp, like I kind of think everybody is 100% unique. Every company is unique. Every leadership situation, back to that
It's
point we were
unique.
on, is unique. So better to think that way than, oh, I know exactly what to do here. This is exactly the same as what I've done before. Probably not. Probably not. Oh, that's great. Well, listen, such a joy, such a pleasure, Sudhakar. Really enjoyed this chat. I knew I would. Kind of wide ranging things in the industry, what's happening in the world of security and identity, leadership principles, and things we keep learning to do what we do better. So I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining. I'm sure this will be a fun one for folks to listen and learn. And look forward to continue to see you out and around in the world. We get a chance to do that every so often. But thanks for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Look forward to it.